Greetings. Abene. Thank you. Abene binhamne yowule. Thank you, wise ancestors of the past. I just spoke my mother tongue, Balanta, which after 8 generations of ethnocide, I am in the process of reclaiming, relearning, while I live in my ancestral homeland after a long prophetic captivity. I am honored and excited to be here to make this presentation, to be amongst colleagues who have a deep interest in this subject that I also have. And I also note that I'm happy to see my brother and comrade Paliani, who made it known to me that it was this conference that has reunited us after 20 years. We first began reasoning and engaged each other while we were trotting Rastafari. And maybe later on, he and I will be able to talk a little bit about that journey. Okay, my presentation is Towards Kdèssi Whèha, the Pan Afrikan Spiritual Imperative. I will define what Kdèssi Whèha is a little bit later. The foundation and context of this presentation is the central paradox. Africa produced the greatest civilization on earth, right? Ancient Egypt or Kemet, yet faces the deepest challenges today. The question is how did we fall from such heights and how do we recover? Now, the historical foundation, we're going to talk about the golden age of ancient Egypt's spiritual achievement. We have Kemet, the first, oldest, greatest civilization known to mankind. We have a spiritual system centered on realizing the indwelling divinity in mankind. And I would add its relationship to the vital life force energy that is present in every object, both living and non-living. That spiritual achievement had created the first iteration of Homo spiritualis. And this was done through an institution known as the mystery schools at An. Today in the Greek, if you read the Bible, it's referred to as An or Heliopolis. The architectural and astronomical proof are the Giza pyramid complex itself, which I am estimating around 10,500 before the Common Era. Okay. Some of its characteristics, as I'm sure everybody knows, right? It's perfect alignment with the Leo constellation and the Orion belt. And this demonstrates access to divine intelligence. Now, the core spiritual teaching during this golden age was man, know thyself. It was inscribed at the temple of Luxor. At that time, our ancestors knew and taught that we had 2 natures. We had a divine nature that is rooted in the 11 laws of spirit, or Maat, which encompasses truth, balance, order. And we had an animal nature represented by the animal parts of our brain, the reptilian part of our brain, and then we had a human part, which is represented by our mammalian part of the brain. And that this nature is driven by ego, emotion, and sensuality. Success during this golden age of spirituality equaled or meant allowing the indwelling divinity to rule one's life. Now, I am assuming that everybody in this symposium is familiar with the Pawet Neteru, the Kemetic tree of life, the cosmogram of our ancient Anu ancestors' spirituality. At that time, just as we have a physical body and a physical anatomy, and I can ask each and every one of you, name the parts of your physical anatomy, the various organs and systems and functions, and most of you could do it. You could say, "Oh, I have a respiratory system. It consists of the lungs organs. Its function is to inhale, to take in oxygen, and to exhale carbon dioxide. I have a cardiovascular system. Its main organ is the heart, the various blood vessels, arteries. Its job is to take the oxygen and circulate it to the various tissues throughout the body. I have a neurological system. Most of you can name the parts of your physical anatomy, their relation to other parts, and their functions. And because of that, and because of knowledge of that system, you can scientifically, right, improve each of those systems. We know this through, for example, athletic training. I'm a world-class swimmer. Coaches that mastered this anatomy, this system, will say, if you want to reach the highest level, right, become an Olympic swimming champion or track and field champion or wrestler, you have to do these things to improve these systems, and you have to train them to work together in this way in order to enhance physical performance. Well, likewise, our ancestors also were able to, through the indwelling divine intelligence, map out their invisible yet real energetic and spiritual systems. And they labeled the parts. You can see you have the Ak, the Ka, the Ba, the Kat, the Ren, Kaibit, Ab. I'm not going to be able to go into all of those in this presentation. It's just by way of reference. And they also mapped out that there were 11 divine faculties that emanated from before creation. There's nothing that exists, so there's nothing that can disturb the peace, and then emanated through these faculties that we give the names to: Aser, Tahudi, Sekert, Maat, Herakuti, Heru, Heteru, Sebek, Alset, and Geb. We all need to master these things. I'll come back to this. Let me continue. Well, let me say this. The top triangle here represents the realm of the divine or heaven. This bottom area represents the earthly, the human. So this is the divine realm. This is the human realm, the earthly realm. And in the middle sits this faculty where we get to choose where our, for lack of a better word, focus and intention resides. Are we going to choose to, through these faculties, access the divine realm and let it dominate and rule our behavior? Or are we going to use our lower faculties focused on the personality and our physical sensations and allow that to rule our behavior? It's a choice we make. All right, so this is my own diagram to explain this, okay? At the highest level, we have peace because nothing exists. So if nothing exists, there's nothing to disturb anything. So our fundamental nature is peace. Once that divine energy initiates creation, once there is creation, there is what is called omnipresence, right? There is nothing that the Creator created where the Creator isn't. The Creator is present in all things, so it's omnipresent. That is one of its fundamental characteristics. From that, we get the second emanation. If the Creator is everywhere at all times and in everything, there's nothing hidden from it. That means it is all-knowing, or what we call omniscience. And from those two, we derive the third characteristic of the divine realm, which is omnipotence. If the Creator is everywhere at all times in everything, nothing is hidden from it, so it knows everything, it is all-powerful, omnipotent, okay? Those are the divine aspects that we as man and woman created in the image of the divine creator share in. But we are only able to consciously access that when we use our will to through the divine faculties of number 4, which is truth. Meaning, from omniscience, all is known, is derived what is true, and from that, joy. I won't explain that in detail, just let it stand. Likewise, from omnipotence, all powerful, comes this faculty, herokuti. It's discipline. Meaning, if you are all powerful, you have enough power to say no to things that are harmful to you and to say yes to the things that you need to take responsibility for and do. There is no excuse for not doing what needs to be done. If you are accessing the omniscience of the divine through the faculty of Maat, truth, given by Tehuti, and you have the power to what? Limit yourself to that which is truth. Okay? This faculty here, our will, it has no energy, no matter, no program. It's free. It has to be no energy, no matter, no program, because if it had those things, it would be limited. And therefore, what it does is compelled by finite components. And then finally, the lower spheres. So 10 is the earth, okay? Sphere 9 and 10 is the physical body. Then you have a personality, you have an intellect, and you have an imagination. If we use our intellect and imagination only to satisfy the needs and desires of our physical body and our personality, we remain in the lower sphere. We are not guided by the divine intelligence. And this is the root cause of all of our problems on earth. So, in answer to that question, how, when we have the golden age of spirituality and the greatest civilization, how is it that we fell into the condition we are in now? In order to answer that from within our own ancient Anu spiritual system, we have to deal with this divine faculty called Herokuti. And it deals with protection as an active alignment, not a favor. Divine protection is not a separate deity stepping in to change the physical rules of the world. Protection is the automatic byproduct of a population keeping its collective energy vibratory, unified, and disciplined. If a civilization stops doing the rigorous spiritual work required to maintain that high vibration, the protection vanishes automatically. So here you see, right, protection, active alignment. It's not a deity coming in to do supernatural things to protect us. No. When we are in our indigenous African spirituality and that indwelling divine intelligence is ruling our behavior, we have this protective force field. Okay? This is what our ancestors were doing up until the 3rd dynasty in Kemet. For reasons that I'll explain in a minute, that work weakened and caused cracks in the internal spiritual alignment, right, in our shield. And the law of Herokuti, the divine judgment, automatic, right, meant that our protection vanished. What happened? We had an internal breakdown of Maat. The 3rd dynasty kings abandoned the servant of God role and instead sought absolute power through human ambition and greed. They violated the principles of Ma'at, universal balance, and the result was Isfet, chaos, injustice. Violence replaced order. Okay? The societal consequences were the following. The old kingdom collapsed through internal revolution. This is before any foreign invaders. The fragmentation, it resulted in fragmentation and weakening of society. The population became vulnerable to invasion and foreign domination. and the psychological vulnerability, right? There was a fear of a second death, and that opened the door to foreign religions. I'll explain that in a moment. Okay. So why did Kemet experience an internal moral and spiritual decline? We need to know the answer to this, because if for some reason, using our traditional African spirituality, we create again this homo spiritualis, this man that is ruled by the divine intelligence, we did that before, and yet something went wrong and it failed. And if we don't study and understand that, we can reproduce that and fall victim to the same thing. What happened was this. There was a shift from spiritual cultivation to externalized ritual. Within the tradition, we call this the Sebek trap. Sebek being the faculty of our intellect. In Kemet's early golden ages, spirituality was an exact science of self-mastery. Initiates underwent decades of training to silence their emotions, tame their animal nature, which was called Set, and awaken their inner Aser, their divine self. Over millennia, the high spiritual standards of the priesthood began to slacken. The spiritual system gradually shifted from a science of inner transformation to a system of externalized ritual, religion, and fortune telling. So much so that, for example, today, you can ask, like, for example, I went to my Balanta community and I asked the young people, why do we sacrifice? Why do we slaughter cows during the Tokorchur, right, which is the funeral ceremonies? And their answer was to show off how wealthy the ancestor was, which is not why that thing started. Yes, that's true. That is what's happening today. But they did not understand that originally, right, the blood carried the vital life force energy. And the ground was the portal into the ancestral realm, because when you die, your body what? Goes back into the ground. So we live from the ground and then we return to the ground. So the earth was considered to be the vessel that knows everything and was the portal into the ancestral realm. And so when you slaughter that animal, that blood soaks into the ground. That is a jurisdictional transaction that is taking place between the living earthly realm and the ancestral realm. And because the transitioning ancestor is going into a new community, he has to be presented and, for lack of a better term, pay a rent. And in order to sustain that individual, the more life force energy, the more blood that was soaked into the ground, showed how serious his children, his grandchildren, his lineage, how serious they were that this ancestor be received well. This was some of the understanding of why that's practiced, but we had lost that. They were performing the external rituals without understanding the inner meaning of it all and the inner cause and effect mechanism of the ancestral science. The consequence was that instead of cultivating the actual power of the higher spheres, peoples and especially the rulers began relying on the lower intellect, the Sebek, sphere 8, and superficial religious compliance. They thought performing the rituals perfectly was enough, forgetting that true protection requires absolute purity of mind and spirit. Now, I wrote an article that goes into great detail in this particular period and what happened. It's called Understanding the Theban Sorcery Lodges, the False Salvation of the Soul, and the Fall of the Anu at An in ancient Kemet that opened the door to foreign invasion, religion, and imperial domination. So if you want to get a thorough understanding and explanation of how and why this happened at that particular time, you can go there. One of the most consequential aspects was what became spiritual fear. For the individual, this is what the Theban sorcery lodges was falsely teaching and misapplied. That for the individual, the breakdown of Maat meant the possibility of a second death in the afterlife. If one's heart was found heavier than the feather of Maat during the weighing of the heart ceremony, it would be devoured by the monster Amet, causing the soul to cease to exist entirely. That was a perversion of the original teaching. And here then is where the appeal of a redeemer, a Christ salvation that can assure life in the afterlife, in the heaven, by a simple one-time confession of sin and acceptance of a Savior, in this case, Jesus. There was a spiritual fear that came in by this false teaching, because Maat, right, did not teach that your soul would be destroyed. So now with our protective shield cracked, spiritual fear, and the increase of both leadership, priesthood, and people now operating from their lower selves and no longer striving to use their divine faculties to achieve the oneness, the peace, the omniscience, the omnipresence, the omnipotence that they share with the Creator. This is what allowed the Hyksos invasion, the first invasion of foreigners, right? This came from Amorite or Semitic foreign peoples known as the Shashu or the Habiru. They exploited or weakened Egypt after internal strife. They aimed at the extermination of the original Anu people and their replacement. The religious corruption, right? These foreign invaders misunderstood the mystery school teachings that were happening at the temple of Luxor or Waset, called An in the Bible. They mistook the spiritual sun people for literal sun worshippers. And this is where they introduced the foreign Abrahamic religions while our spiritual shield was down, preaching external salvation. This replaced the internal divine realization with worship of external saviors. Now, quick biblical contradiction for those that are well familiar with the Bible. Genesis introduces a paradox. Genesis 1:26-27 says, God created mankind in his own image. Genesis 2:16-17 and 3:5 commands mankind not to realize their divinity. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge. The problem, why create humans in God's image yet forbid them from realizing it? The evidence of the original teaching still is in the Bible, because it affirms the Egyptian mystery school doctrine. If you go to Psalms 82:6-7, John 10:34-35, Proverbs 23:7, and John 8:32. It says, ye are gods, confirming the divine potential in all humans. Meanwhile, Moses, who is a fictitious character designed to use the Bible as a sacred teaching literature. In that story, Moses is trained at this school of An, the original school teaching the original spirituality, and Joseph marries a daughter of the high priest of An. Okay, these are clues that the Bible lets you know that what I'm saying is true. Okay.
Brother Spear, just to let you know, you've got 8 minutes left.
Okay, I'm wrapping up. I'm on slide 14 of 19. All right. Now, Kemet's fall leads to the trans-Saharan slave trade. Within the Medu Netur, our original sacred teachings, the foreign invasions into Kemet by the Hyksos, the Assyrians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans represent the metaphysical fall of the global spiritual epicenter. This historical collapse directly sets the stage for the Arab trans-Saharan slave trade. Okay, by this time, the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, they're already institutionalizing massive chattel slavery in North Africa. Okay, this caused or forced the people of North Africa into survival mode. So now they are focused on spheres 7, 8, and 9, just on how to survive. And so this is what allowed the Arabs to come in and do the destruction that they did in the name of Islam, this Abrahamic religion. Now, the trans-Saharan slave trade leads to the Dum Diversis War and the enslavement by Europeans. Enslavement under the trans-Saharan trade forced large populations into a chronic generational state of fight or flight. This forced the collective consciousness and vibratory power down from the higher spheres into the lowest center of the tree in the realm of Set. A population operating from the lower nature is structurally vulnerable to external conquest. The trans-Saharan trade did the psychological heavy lifting of instilling fear. If you're an infidel, right, you're going to be conquered by these, powerful weapon, horse riding, Muslims, right? It instilled this fear. It divided the people between, right, Islam, Muslim faithful, and infidels, and caused this trauma over hundreds of years. The European transatlantic trade simply capitalized on this pre-existing, deeply entrenched psychic vulnerability, using advanced Setian brutality to complete the material capture of the continent. The Arab trans-Saharan trade was the metaphysical and psychological catalyst, while the European transatlantic trade was the material execution. Now, who was at the head of this trans-Saharan trade? It was these West African kingdoms, Mansa Musa, Mali, right? These leaders of these West African kingdoms, right, were perpetrating this Setian brutality. So the automatic justice, the law of Herakuti, was applied to them. Thus, it was what? West Africa, which suffered the European trade, because it was West Africa that had laid the groundwork through the trans-Saharan impact. All right, towards Kdèssi Whèha. The Balanta people, who are some of the original inhabitants of the Happy or Nile Valley, who migrated from there to their homeland on the west coast of Africa in Guinea-Bissau before 3500 BC. So before Narmer invades and unites the three different confederacies to establish the first dynasty in Egypt. My ancestors left. We had nothing to do with that. We were gone by then. They have a word that best describes this historical imperative. The Sina, which means to recover a soul of a sick person caught in witchcraft by a witch doctor, and Kdèssi, which means recovering of the soul of a sick person. Only then can the person experience Whèha, which means to be healed, cured. So the Pan-African, I have 3 slides, I'm done. The Pan-Afrikan Spiritual Imperative is this. It's Kdèssi Whèha, returning to the source, to heal the souls of sick people harmed by this witchcraft. We invoke the Sankofa principle, go back and get it, learn from the past to build the future. We must recover the original spiritual teachings, reconnect with the indwelling divine intelligence in order to produce Homo spiritualis. We have to transform Homo sapiens sapiens to Homo spiritualis, meaning we have to master the animal and human nature through spiritual discipline, Herakuhuti. We have to allow the divine intelligence and rule. We have to allow indwelling divine intelligence to rule voluntary and involuntary behavior. We have to actually program our subconscious through neurolinguistic programming, right? We have to reprogram our subconscious behavior, which, as most of us know, is the majority of our behavior. It's automatic subconscious programming. It's not conscious. This is the reason why people can say, I want to quit smoking, but can't. This is the reason why people know they need to eat right and exercise, and yet they don't. We have to restore Maat in individual and society, and we have to apply it in this age of artificial intelligence. We have a new threat, digital colonialism or foreign domination via AI. It's the same pattern, external technology replacing internal wisdom. The solution is to strengthen the divine consciousness through specific technologies designed to do so, just like an Olympic coach uses specific training to produce Olympic champions. And then we build new African civilizations based on this new spiritual foundation. So here's the call to action. For individuals, pursue self-knowledge, develop moral faculties, realize the divinity that dwells within you. For communities, restore the spiritual governance, meaning only those people that can demonstrate that they have activated sovereign activation, and they have reached identified levels. I won't go into that now, but there's strict curriculums. There's a way to determine all of this. Only those people who have reached a certain level of realizing their divinity are allowed to serve in government. For the continent, unite on this spiritual imperative, echoing Nkrumah's unite or perish. And for humanity, we have to model the alternative to materialist AI-dependent civilization. My last slide. This is just, everybody will have access to this. I'll drop the link where all of this is available to you. You can download the PDFs, but this is my research that deals with a lot of this and goes into great detail. So let me land there and take questions. Thank you.